Hello, and welcome to another edition of these NAYT vlogs, where I, Henry, chat to someone from NAYT's board. This time it's Steph.
Hello.
Steph. So Steph, you wear lots of different hats.
I do.
Do you want to go through some of these hats that you've? We don't have them.
We don't literally have them, no, which is terrible actually. As drama practitioners, we should carry a bag of hats and stuff everywhere we go.
So this vlog is all about costume. And props? No, it's not. It's all about important things. But first of all, Steph, so tell us about what you do.
Okay, so I sit on the NAYT board and have done for a couple of years. I run a small arts charity based in Cheshire called Minerva Arts. So we run a network of 7 youth theatres all across the Cheshire area. I'm also the engagement manager for Peshkar, which is a national portfolio organisation based in Oldham, just outside Greater Manchester. And then I freelance all over the place doing lots of different things. Sometimes I still do a little bit of facilitation. Primarily, the stuff that I do is sort of using drama to look at issues to do with employability or life skills and confidence and things like that. But then I do freelance project management for people. So I was working with Manchester Histories last year, and I'm working with Cheshire East Council at the moment.
Cool. So we thought we'd do a vlog about funding, that fantastic, inspiring phrase.
Don't turn off. It is important.
So the first thing we chatted about was a few times it comes up. There's a lot of jargon around phrases.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, some people don't know what the word NPO means.
Okay.
So do you want to just start us off with different ways organisations are funded?
Sure.
Yeah.
So within the arts sector, we have a mechanism by which some organisations can receive funding on a regular basis. That funding comes from Arts Council England. When you see that as an acronym, it's usually ACE. So when you see ACE on something, that's what it's relating to, and they are ACE in a way. And their regular mechanism is called the National Portfolio. Back in the day, so pre-2012, this was known as regularly funded organisations. So occasionally, you might still hear people refer to themselves as being RFOs. That's outdated lingo. It's been National Portfolio Organisations since 2012. And that basically just means that you receive a set amount of money every year for now a period of 4 years. Up until the period before last year, it was 3-year cycles. We've now gone on to 4-year cycles. So it's as simple as that, really. You have to do reporting to Arts Council along with the funding that you receive. And the amounts of money that people get expand and contract depending on the size of the organisation. However, there are other ways in which Arts Council funds. Mm-hmm. So the one that people are probably most familiar with is a setup that was, again, up until recently, called Grants for the Arts. Mm-hmm. So when somebody refers to a G4A or a GFTA, it's a Grants for the Arts. They're actually not called that anymore, just to overcomplicate matters a little bit for you. They're now just referred to as project grants. There is also a separate pot of funding called Developing Your Creative Practice, which is more geared towards freelance artists. So anybody, and we mean anybody, can apply for an Arts Council project grant. They are split into 2 categories. So you can apply for an under 15 grand, which is a moderately simple application process with not very heavy monitoring afterwards.
6 weeks turnover.
6 weeks turnaround, pretty good.
So that means that you'll know whether you've got the money within 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Which is kind of handy if it's something that's coming up in the next few months and you kind of see that this could happen.
Yeah. And then you can also then go for over 15 grand, which carries with it a longer turnaround, a bigger form, and a little bit more monitoring as well. But you're generally encouraged, if you're fairly new to that sort of landscape, to go for those under 15 granders first, because that way you're sort of starting to build a bit of a relationship with that funder and you're on their radar and they know who you are.
So an example of an under 15k could be our recent NAYT project. So that was running youth theatre festivals. It's still ongoing. Got one more across the UK, and that was paying for staff time to plan and programme, the workshop facilitators, an access pot, marketing money, money to update the website, that sort of stuff, and that was 15k for it. It started off as just under a year, and then we were allowed to expand it to about 18 months or so, including our Raising the Game event. So that was one example of a kind of long project over a year, 15k. So do you have any examples that you've worked on that you've put in for that are more you've led, like working with young people?
Yeah, so we, as Minerva, we've had 2 grants for the arts, because they were quite a long time ago, bids coming from Arts Council. So one of those was for a programme called Link Cheshire, where we worked with several different youth theatre groups all across the Cheshire area, and that money paid for us to hire venues, it paid for us to employ facilitators. It paid for things like being able to transport young people between different venues. It paid for a bit of tech. It paid for things like refreshments if young people were doing full days with us. And then we also did another project called Arts in the Villages, which was back in 2013, which took different professional artists from different disciplines into different rural locations across Cheshire. And again, the money all paid for very, very similar stuff. So you're always going to be talking your professional fees, so your staff time, resourcing, so simple things like buying things for your workshops, things to make set, props, costume with, usually some travel expenses, often a little bit of volunteer expenses. So if you are engaging any volunteers to work on the project, to help them with their travel or with a bit of subsistence, and sometimes things like that come into your core costs as well. So for Minerva, we don't have a base, so we're not paying for offices or Wi-Fi or phones or anything like that. But we do have to pay insurances, so we can apportion a certain amount of what we pay per year for our insurance into a bid like an Arts Council bid, and that money is there for you to use.
I mean, it's hours and hours of workshopping around writing these bids, but are there a few key things that you think are really important when going into planning, the thinking about very early stages of we could do a project and we want to look for some Arts Council funding, like what should we really have in our heads?
I think with any pot funding, it's about having an awareness of what that particular funder is looking for. So with Arts Council, they are an arts funder, so they're very keen on you being able to evidence the quality of what you're doing. So one of the first pieces of advice that I was ever given when I first started writing applications was to be able to evidence almost the back catalogue of the people that you were going to work with really well. So to be able to talk about the people who you were going to engage, to be able to say what they've done before, what their track record is. It kind of almost goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, your financials are super important. Don't be afraid to be really, really honest in what you are asking for. If something is going to cost X amount, don't say, oh no, but I'll only ask for that much, because you're going to trip yourself up in the end. And when it comes to reporting on that, you need to be able to say, well, I said I was going to spend that amount of money on that, and I did. So don't undersell things that you are going to offer in your financials. What Arts Council also asks you, though, is about how you are going to manage your financials, and a lot of other funders will ask that as well. So they're keen to know how adept you are at project managing. So what projects have you put together before? What systems do you use to manage these things? As simple as, I'm going to put all of my figures into an Excel spreadsheet, and every time an invoice comes in, I'm going to mark it off the Excel spreadsheet so I know what money I have and I can manage my cash flow. It sounds really, really blindingly obvious, but if you can articulate that and put that down in that form, you're proving to the person that's reading it that you're not just some chancer that doesn't have a clue what they're doing.
And while we're on Arts Council, just to quickly mention developing your creative practice.
Yes.
So this is for an individual. It's a lot less intensive. It's still difficult questions, but not to the same level. It's for up to $1,000 off the top of my head.
I can't.
Not a full, sorry, not a grand. It's 8 to 10 grand.
I think it's something like that. It's not one that I have spent a lot of time with because I'm not an artist. So it's not something that I would be going and applying for. But I think it's really useful to look at if you are somebody that very clearly has your own practice, and you are looking at doing something that is solo based, so you're not attaching yourself to an organisation, you're not formally constituting yourself in any way. And I think the key word within that is developing. So Arts Council got a lot of flack back in the Grants for the Arts days for giving money to people to go off and study flamenco for 2 years, and that was all being considered within the same pot as projects that were perhaps a little bit more social. This separates all of that stuff out. So if you are looking to go and spend 3 months learning how to whittle spoons, then, which is a terrible example, it sounds like I'm being really reductive.
Say you were you worked as a youth theatre assistant, or you led a few groups, but you wanted to develop your practice as a director of the youth theatre. You could potentially apply to get some mentoring from youth theatre directors in buildings. So it's about going, what do I personally want for the next stage, rather than young people.
It's your opportunity to actually be really selfish and thinking about your own practice, which is actually a brilliant opportunity that most of us don't get very often and haven't had historically. So if that's your bag, if that's the area that you really want to have a go at, and if you've got those contacts to be able to say, well, I've worked in this theatre, this theatre and this theatre, and I know that they'll be happy to let me spend a bit of time with them, bang in and developing your creative practice.
I think my advice for anyone is to go on the Arts Council website, ring the Arts Council, ask for a meeting, just kind of go straight to them and ask them for some thoughts.
Absolutely, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to get hold of people directly, but in general, people do want to speak to you about it. A good little top tip is, if you are a freelancer and you're working for an NPO, ask that NPO to put you in contact with their relationship manager, because every national portfolio organisation has a member of Arts Council staff who looks after them, sort of manages their contract. That person will be aware of that organisation's setup, so they'll understand the sort of context that you're working in, and they're usually pretty up for going and having a coffee or having a Skype or chatting on the phone.
Cool. So that's Arts Council.
That's Arts Council.
Let's also just kind of touch base. We talked about freelancers, NPOs. Then there are also a limited company. So a limited company is a registered company, registered with Companies House, which is an organisation with a name. But then a limited company can also become a charity, and charities allow you a little bit more access to different pots of money.
They do. Yes, they do. So back when I was first starting up Minerva and getting us formally constituted, we originally started as a partnership organisation, and a partnership organisation is very, very easy to administer. So there was 2 of us. We were both registered self-employed with HMRC, and we filled in a little form online that just said we are working in a partnership. All that meant was that when we were submitting our tax returns every year, we also filled in a partnership tax return, which was super, super simple. That was great in our first few years, because it enabled us to do the work that we wanted to do, to evidence that we were sharing any monies that were coming out of it. But as things moved along and we realised that we were going to have to start accessing funding, the option that was most recommended to me was to register as a company limited by guarantee. And that limited by guarantee bit is really key, because when you are not going to be a profit-making company, your company's structure needs to be such that you're not sort of giving dividends out, or you're not becoming publicly tradable, and you're not selling shares to people. So when you create a company limited by guarantee, you get a lovely form and you bring a few people on to be your directors, and they make a stake of £1 into that organisation, and that helps to form that company. What you can then do is become a charity as well. And it's that charity status that gives you that way into all of these different multitudinous pots of funding that are available. Becoming a charity, again, is fairly simple, but there are plenty of organisations out there that can help with this process. It's never something that you should have to do on your own. All it takes is a bit of registration on the Charities Commission website. you pass a special resolution within your company and do a little bit of a tweak on your articles of association, which is your governing document, and then you get your charities number. The people that can really help with this, and they're also incredibly helpful when it comes to looking for funding, are your local community and voluntary support organisations. So you can search for those by just putting in, for example, your local area and community and voluntary service, or CVO or CVS into Google. It might take a couple of tries, but you'll find those people. And I think what sometimes those of us in the arts forget is that when we're registered as charities or as CICs or as CIOs, which I'll come on to in a second, we're charities. We're in the third sector. Just because we're also part of the arts and cultural sector doesn't mean that we're not also in that same pot with other third sector organisations that don't even touch the arts. So those support bodies, those CVSs or CVOs, are there to give an enormous amount of service. So they can support you to formally constitute. They can support you with getting governing documents together. They can then also help you search for funding. They are absolutely fantastic.
And so in terms of searching for funding,
yeah,
I mean, we can obviously post some details here of all the trusts and foundations. There are a multitude of ones.
There are loads.
But if one is a company, a charity, and is looking for places to get funding, where can one kind of begin a search?
Well, there's a couple of different ways that you can start searching. Number one is you can just start banging funding into Google and just gradually sorting through all of that information. Number two is to sign up with your local community and voluntary organisation, because they'll usually have a newsletter as well that they'll send you monthly. There are two other newsletters that I get that are really, really useful. One is called Funding Central. You have to register on Funding Central's website, and I think if you're a profit maker or if you're a freelancer, then they do charge you a little bit. But if you are a CIC or a company or a charity, then you get it for free. There's also Get Grants. Get Grants is my absolute favourite. Get Grants sends you at the beginning of every month a list of every grant stream that is going to run out or have a deadline in the next month. So you kind of have to work it into your schedule. So you have to have a day put aside to say, okay, this is my Get Grants day, because a lot of the deadlines in there are going to be super quick. But it's a matter of going through, clicking on it, saying no, clicking through, no. You'll maybe get 2 out of that list that are going to be appropriate for you. So they're really the best ways of finding funding. My main thing would also be, and I say this to people when I run training sessions and stuff, is to not be tied or wedded to the idea of Arts Council or trusts that have arts in the title. There's an awful lot of scope for people that do the work that we do to get funding from places that are not just about the arts. We can get money from social funders. We can get money from CSR, corporate social responsibility based funders. We can get money from heritage funders, because we're really lucky in youth theatre that we can pretty much build projects around whatever we choose. As long as it fits in with your company's ethos, with your charitable objectives, and you believe in it, and it doesn't contradict with any of your ethics, you can create that project. So at Minerva, we've been really successful over the years in getting money from what is now called the National Lottery Heritage Fund, used to be Heritage Lottery or HLF. They're a fantastic funder. As the name suggests, they distribute money from the National Lottery, and their focus is on history and heritage. And the amount of youth theatre work that I've done over the years that takes in a historical-based theme, it's a bit of a no-brainer. So they're a really great one to look at. An interesting example as well is from last year. So we got some money from the Stop Loan Sharks Fund, which is administered through Birmingham City Council, and it's proceeds of crime money. So when a loan shark gets prosecuted, their money gets seized, and part of it goes into this fund. And Stop Loan Sharks put a call out once a year for companies to get in touch and say, we think we can run a project that will raise awareness about loan sharks and to publicise the work that illegal money lending teams do. And we got money from that. They're not massive pots, but I think your flexibility is your greatest strength when it comes to accessing funding.
And is there a lot of so, you know, you work with young people and it's about kind of buzzwords like enriching their lives, empowering their lives, making sure that what I'm interested in is there are funding streams where they need to write off some money for tax purposes. They want to give a donation out, and they'll go, and it's a grand or something. They'll go, Battersea Dogs Home, or you know, give it to the charities they know, Oxfam, just what's on the top of their agenda. Whereas we can play a little bit with how important youth theatre is, and how amazing these projects. This money will go to support our work. What's just some ways that you can kind of collate that to show funders how brilliant the sector is, how brilliant your arts organisation is?
I think getting yourself funding ready is really, really key. So that goes right the way back to how do you evaluate your work? I mean, we could do an entire different conversation around evaluation and the different methodologies that we can use for that. But collecting that information from your young people that really strongly evidences that what you're doing is really good, that people are getting a lot out of it, that it's benefiting the wider community, that it's impacting on soft skills, that it's impacting on educational attainment or literacy or breaking down social isolation or preventing loneliness, all of these enormous issues, all of which youth theatre can help. If you've got a case that is ready-made, then it will make the process of starting to apply for these funds a lot easier. One of the things that I recently started doing was, so we'd applied for the Aviva Community Fund. Okay, some of you might have heard about this. So Aviva, who are obviously a big insurance company, as part of their corporate social responsibility, they release a funding stream every year. And they do it on different levels. So you can go for £1,000, or you can, I think, go for 5, or you can go for 10. And they're all based on public votes, which can automatically make the anxiety just go, oh my God, I'm not good enough at social media to be able to do this. We always go for the £1,000, and we've had it twice, and it's just really, really handy to get in through the door. And if you can mobilise people well, then it's great. One of the things that I started doing this year to help our social media was taking quotes that we had from our evaluation that we've been doing over the last year, using our old friend Canva, which if you've never used Canva before, it is a bit of free online software that you can use to create posters and leaflets and social media banners. Pop a little bit of text from one of the evaluations into a pre-made social media banner from Canva, and use those to send out into the ether on your social media with the link to vote on. We did exactly the same thing when we launched our first local giving campaign earlier on in the year. So I've always been absolutely terrified of crowdfunding. I hate it. And even to the extent where when people have advertised, come to this workshop about crowdfunding, I've said, no, I just want to completely forget about it. But I had a support session last year from my local community and voluntary organisation, who talked to me about how you can do crowdfunding without the stressful bit of if you don't raise all the money, you don't get any of the money. So you can set up online giving platforms that don't have that anxiety attached to them. And the one that we use is Local Giving, but there are other ones out there that are equally as good. And we decided to launch our first social media campaign to try and raise some funds, and those banners were the way that we pumped it out across social media. So it takes a little bit of work to prep them, get them ready, but then you can schedule a few months worth of social media posts, get them popping out there into the world, and see what return you get off them.
Cool. Steph, thank you very much. Is there any kind of last things you want to throw in? I mean, we could talk about this for hours and hours.
Yeah.
If there's anything that's come out that you're really interested in, and maybe even could be a whole video, just let us know. Send an email, info@nayt.org.uk, or comment below, join the conversation.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to talk in any more depth about constituting yourself as a company or a charity, or a little bit more about that mix of funding, so mixing up grant streams with traded services and commissions with accessing donors or sponsorship or anything like that, then I'd be happy to chat a little bit more about that as well.
Great. Thank you very much, folks. Take care.
Bye.